Aloha, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another season, that's right, of Our Undoing Radio. And normally I like to space these things out and take forever to record them. But funny thing happened on the way past last season, which is that Tom Cheetham, who I spoke quite a bit about, or at least framed a lot of the episodes last season in terms of questions I had received or concerns that had come up during a seminar series of his that involved me. Since I did all that, since I framed it that way, I invoked the name Tom Cheetham. And so Tom has, in fact, come out of the genie bottle and granted me a wish, which is to do an entire season with him. So this whole season, and maybe it will be either a super long season or it will end up being 2 seasons, will be in dialogue with Tom Cheetham. Who is Tom Cheetham? If you don't know, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to let him tell you, because that's what this first episode will be, is an introduction to who Tom Cheetham is, how he found me, and why we're doing this. How's that sound? I think you'll find it fascinating. I think we're going to go to places that few have dared to tread. Oh, yes. And I can already tell you that a lot of this will involve discussions around Jeff Kripal's latest book, How to Think Impossibly, because, well, both Tom and I are in that book. And so I don't know that's... Yeah, well, I guess that's why I read anything. I only read things that I'm in, so that's me. I can't speak for Tom. Tom, a better person than I am, less of a narcissist, so maybe he reads other things. I keyed. If you want to find out more about him than even this episode, I will have a link to his website and his substack in the description here. Please do go read up on him, contact him, take his courses, his seminars, his whatever you want to call them. He doesn't like to call them classes anymore, but, rantings. Rantings of a madman. Let's have a discussion between 2 madmen. And, I didn't even get a chance to say that season 11 goes to 11. I didn't get a chance to make my Spinal Tap joke that I love to make every time an 11 is involved. But, okay, you get it. This one goes to 11. And as such, I guess I should probably warn you that this is the first season, and however long Tom Cheetham is on here, 1 season, 2 seasons, where there's cussy words. That's right, there's explicit language. That's right, we're cursing you with curse words. Because I didn't want to break up the conversation by, saying, hey, Tom, could you self-edit? Or myself, I will partake later. Not immediately, but it gets there. So I apologize in advance for anyone with virginal ears, but that's the way it is. I guess without further ado, let's get on with the show. 3, 2, 1, right now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another season of Our Undoing Radio. This is completely special because it is the first time that it is sort of co-hosted or co-chatting. I don't know. We're co-piloting with Tom Cheetham. Tom, welcome to Our Undoing, and thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you for asking me. This should be fun. I think this was a mutual decision, and we were both a little surprised by the other one. We were mutually surprised that, he would want to do this?
Right. Well, I mean, as you know, like last season was very Tom Cheetham seminar-centric. And so it would only make sense to have capped that off with an episode with you, but then you said like you would do an entire season, which is like unfathomable to me. So awesome.
I did actually say that. Yeah. Okay.
Which is good because I already had a closer for that one that I wanted to do. So I was like, okay, perfect.
All right.
This is going to be amazing. But so my audience, I try to keep them dumb as a cult leader so that they only pay attention to me. So in case they're unfamiliar with
you. Yeah, I do that too. Yeah.
Tell us about you. How are you? You talk about things in terms of philosophy / mysticism, but your background prior to that, via Henry Corbin, I guess, and we'll
Yeah,
get into that,
yeah.
was
Oh,
as purely as a scientist.
yeah.
And so tell us about your scientist background and how you swerved into mysticism.
Well, okay, yeah, and actually, I am considerably older than you,
What?
and I am by many years, and as a result of that, maybe it gives me permission to do something I've done a lot of anyway, which is think about my life, my life, because it doesn't seem to make any sense, and yet here I am, and talking to you of all people, and somehow this all does seem to hang together, but I'm not, but I'm at a point in my life where I'm trying to figure out, but how, so. And I actually, this will, I really do want to talk about our childhood experiences because the first thing to be said is I am not an experiencer, as the saying goes, except of my own life, which has been relatively normal in terms of standard American lives. I have nothing
Uh-huh.
in particular that's super weird, except maybe when I was a kid. And see, that's where it begins to become of interest to me as I am in my 70s now. And so the short version of the life story, as short as I can make it, is I was sort of a weird, bookish little kid, was sick and tired of high school, had no intention of going to college. My mother said, "You're going to college." I said, "I'm not." She filled out my application and wrote my essay and got me into college. And as soon as I got to college, I thought, wow, this is really great. There's lots of hashish around, and I'll take this philosophy class, and this is really cool. When I was young, I wanted to do nothing but be a scientist. But when I got to college, ah, you had to take like introduction to everything. Introduction to biology, introduction to this. And I don't want to, I know I've just been through 12 years of stupid ass schooling, and I didn't want to have an introduction to anything. I wanted to finally get the real thing. So you didn't have to take intro to philosophy. You could just take ancient philosophy. And you could immediately start talking about being and non-being and serious adult shit. And I fell in love with it. It was really very bad for me in the long run. But I majored in philosophy, was there for 4 years, and tried to go to grad school in philosophy because what do you do but with a philosophy degree? Failed miserably, was there for like 6 weeks and realized, although not quite consciously, in retrospect, I realized, wow, I am so fucked up. I can't cope with anything. And I came back home and I worked as a carpenter and a roustabout for a little while. A couple of years later, tried to go back to college and to graduate school in philosophy at yet another school. And this time I stayed the whole year, and it just wasn't right, man. It was just not right in a million ways that I only kind of understand now. And then I really hung out and did stuff like drinking alcohol and really learning to be a competent carpenter and working for a living and all that. And when I was 30 years old, I was up on somebody's roof in November, and I thought, not in New England, and I thought, I don't want to do this shit when I'm 60 years old. I got to go back to school. So I talked to a very wise friend of my father's who said, well, what did you always want to do? And I said, well, I always wanted to be a theoretical physicist, which was true. And he said, well, go do it. Well, it didn't quite work out that way, but I went back to graduate school and I lived off my wife's assistantship. And I took physics and math and stuff, which I hadn't done since like seventh grade. And I did okay, but the biologists were having all the fun. And I'm not a natural mathematician. I loved the stuff, but I'm not all that good at it. Whereas the biology was fantastic. So I ended up with a PhD in biology, and which we can talk about later on. But with that, with whatever it is that's in me that really loved the philosophy, that would keep cycling through. Short version. I ended up doing what they call theoretical biology, and which was not really what I loved, but at the time I loved it. But it was computer stuff and math stuff and all that. And I was in a bookstore in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1990. I can tell you exactly which bookstore. And I picked up a book by James Hillman, the quasi-Jungian, neo-Jungian, post-Jungian psychologist. Never seen anything like that in my life. And I picked up this book and I started reading about Hillman on the imagination. And I thought, wow, this is what I've been looking for all my life. I was 38, right at the beginning of my very standard midlife Jungian quasi-psychotic breakdown. So it came really nicely into that. And there was something about what he was saying about the imagination. And then the short version is really just, oh, it's all imagination. And I'm going to leave that totally undefined, but it's all imagination. The sciences are imagination, and philosophy is imagination, and your experience is all. And I just fell in love with that idea of that way of bridging the gap, and there's plenty of gaps, but at least bridging the gap between the sciences and all that other stuff, literature, and gosh, maybe even religion. I fell in love with it. I read Hillman for 3 or 4 years, almost exclusively. And then in one of his essays, and here comes the rest of the story, one of his essays is really a fantastic piece called The Thought of the Heart. Right at the beginning, he says, oh, if you really want to know about the imagination, here's your man, Henri Corbin. And I say it with the French accent because the first time I ever gave a lecture on Henry Corbin, I did it in Switzerland. And if you say Henry Corbin in Switzerland, they will think you're an American Philistine, which I am. So I learned very quickly to say Henri Corbin, and then all the Americans think I'm being effete. So anyway, that's it. And so I bought a book. I bought Corbin's Creative Imagination and the Sufism of Ibn Arabi. And I'd never, the house I grew up in was not religious. Maybe that'll come up later. Um, and this guy, my hero, Hillman, tells me, you got to read this guy. This is the source. And it's all about angels and medieval theology and the Quran and the Bible and Moses. And I'm like, oh my God, what is this shit? But at the same time, I couldn't put it down. It was like, wow, this is really weird. And so I struggled with trying to figure out who this guy was and how, why Hillman thought he was so incredibly crucial and important for Hillman's own vision of reality. And at one point, within, several months or a year or more, I discovered that Corbin was the first French translator of Martin Heidegger, who was like this God for my young self as a philosophy major. And I thought, oh, what? What the hell? This makes no sense. Um, and now I see it. Now after, all these years after 1993 or whenever it was that I first read Corbin, it all begins to make some sense to me. Flash forward, I'm very happily writing about Corbin and Hillman and Jung and the imagination and the sciences. And I think I've got all my shit together. And two things happen. And one of them's you, but not directly. I got to you indirectly. Um, I listened to one of Ezra Klein's podcasts just because I do. And he mentioned a book by Eric Davis called High Weirdness. Is that it? Yeah, it's High Weirdness by Eric Davis. and about which more later maybe. And I read that whole book in like really short period of time. And this was like, oh my God, this is very strange stuff because it kind of brought back the 60s for me. I was kind of slightly too young to be a hippie and to do the drug thing. But I knew the 60s, and he was talking about Philip K. Dick and the McKennas and Robert Anton Wilson and crazy shit and California in the 60s. And I just ate it up. And I thought, who is this Eric Davis guy? And turns out he's the student of Jeffrey Kripal. Well, I just met Jeffrey Kripal, who I thought at the time was this crazy person from Rice that I didn't want to have anything to do with. And I'd met him because he was at the Corbin conference at Harvard that I'd just been delighted to have been invited to. I mean, there's, Elliot Wolfson and, Charlie Stang, and there's all these scholars, and I'm not a scholar. So I was totally delighted to be invited to this thing. And there in the flesh was Jeff Kripal. And characteristically, he gave a talk on UFOs and Henri Corbin. And my brain couldn't take it. Let me continue my monologue. You can always edit it. I
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
I couldn't hear what he was saying. I remember meeting him and thinking, gosh, what a sweet guy. But when I heard him talk about UFOs, it wouldn't go in. This was too far outside of my little world of the imagination. And so I really didn't hear what he was saying. Flash forward a few months, and I get invited to go to Brazil to take Iboga, which at my age, I think I'm going to do this I'm going to hit myself with as big a hammer as I possibly can. Never done much in the way of psychedelics, never had much interest. But my friend down there had said, my friend Marco, he'd been taking my classes. And he told me afterwards, he said, I knew you were talking about, I heard you talking about all this imaginal stuff and Corbin and Hillman. He says, I knew you didn't know what you were talking about. And in a very real way, he was right. I mean, I could justify myself because it's not that my life has been without imagination and without significant weird things, but he was right. And he said, you got to come down and do some Iboga. So I go down to do the Iboga. And while I'm down there, I flip open one of Kripal's books. And this captures the spirit of it, although the timing's a little off. Over the course of maybe 3 or 4 weeks, I read 7 of his books. Bang, 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 bang. And it just totally screwed me up. Then I had the Iboga experience, and that didn't help my stability. And one of the things, I kind of want to talk about this, but we'll do it later. I realized at a certain point during that very compressed period that Corbin, Henri Corbin, is all about the paranormal. He has no problem with the paranormal and bilocation and I mean any paranormal kind of phenomenon. I mean, God can do whatever the hell he wants. And if you're an imaginal theologian in the Abrahamic tradition, I mean, you can part the Red Sea, you can walk on water, you can have angels, you can have anything you want. So Corbin's perfectly fine with the paranormal. And Hillman wasn't. And somehow I used Hillman's rejection of the paranormal as a cover. I don't have to go there. Only crazy people go there. People like Jeffrey Kripal and his friggin' UFOs. And then when that wall fell down, and it happened pretty fast, I just thought, oh shit. you know, and it was it was unsettling and exciting and really weird. And I just thought, I got to start all over again because one of Kripal's themes is he draws on Henri Corbin's notion of the imaginal world as one possible way of thinking about this huge, enormous world of impossible shit. Okay. So while I'm reading his work, and then I went back and asked him for a copy of the lecture that he'd read at Harvard. And then I read it and could hear it and could read it. And there you are. And let's bring this to a little close, how we two get together. He says of you all sorts of wonderful things, including he's really funny. He's got a good sense of humor. Well, one of the things that I am super allergic to after all that philosophy and wanting to be Heidegger or Hegel or, pick your favorite depressing German because, you like them because they're serious. I had it with that shit. So if somebody comes at me like that, I don't want anything to do with it. Just soon die and be buried in a hole, never resurrect, nothing. I don't want anything to do with it. And when he talks about, and of course, Jeff's got a great attitude. And when he talks about you, he said, this guy's funny. He says he's had these bizarre experiences. He also doesn't take himself seriously. And he's my teacher, Jeff said. So I grabbed your books. And that was a bit of a rough ride. I didn't read them chronologically. I read them in whatever order I read them, and my first response was, "This guy's fucking nuts." And then because reading your stuff is not like reading Corbin or Hillman or serious, even happy serious people aren't like reading you. And I found that just incredibly wonderful. And then, and the deeper I got into your stuff, I thought, man, this guy knows some shit. And he's not trying to he's just saying, man, this weird stuff. And I think it's like super important. And when I read Urgency, and I think it was in Urgency, there were a couple of paragraphs there that in my memory go something like this. You people, all of you keep listening to your meat brain, and your meat brain isn't going to get you anything because you just have to stop all that. Because anything that you think with your meat brain just isn't going to get you there. And I thought, wow, of course that must be true. Of course that must be true. And then you kind of had me. And something flipped. What you then do with that is that's another set of issues that
Right.
I'm super interested in talking about. So then I did a class on your book, Urgency, and I had my 12 or 15 students, 10, whatever they were. And I said, maybe he'd come to class. And you did. And here we are there. That was like as short as 72 years can be made, I think.
Well, thank you. Well, let me ask you. So it's interesting to me because I'm slowly but surely plugging away at Jeff Kripal's latest book, which is How to Think Impossibly, and I'm just past the point where he's explaining sort of what you just explained, that it seems as though there's religious and philosophical scholars who only concentrate on the sociological and historical
Oh,
aspects of these mystics or whatever you want to call them, but not the, as you say, the paranormal, but it's really the experiential, right? It's like the experience of it has no place in scholarship for a certain body of people. What do you think that is about? Like, how do you get
yeah.
into studying something where people are saying, this happened to me, and you're like, no, no, no. But if we put it in the context of the times, how fascinating.
Yeah, yes. Well, first, yeah, I'm very familiar with that. Although I mean, it's a little disingenuous of me to speak about that because and this is a good thing. I think it's one of the things that makes this all this material maybe more accessible to me than it might otherwise be, because my PhD is in biology. It's in systematic biology. It's not in philosophy or history or religious studies or any of that. And it was only because I'm an amateur, that is, a lover of these things, that I got, that I could never quite hold myself in the little scientific world. And so I'm a little bit of a free range intellect. And so the reason, and so I kind of think that's cool. I think that's useful for me, um, to not have spent 30, 40 years inside a single discipline, because that can make you crazy. I mean, and it can narrow you down in just the kinds of ways that Jeff is talking about. So let me address your question in the following way. Hillman was never an intellectual exercise for me, which, I mean, a lot of people who study Jungian psychology, it's not. They do it because they went crazy and they need some help. So it's really experiential. So that's really true. And the best people in literature, the poets and the writers, do it because it's experiential. But I also see and I enjoy the scholarly aspect, which is the part of academia that drives Jeff crazy, although he acknowledges its importance. The 60s, 70s, he's still alive, poet Gary Snyder said somewhere, the English departments are really important, because otherwise, how would you know you had the right manuscript of Shakespeare or Pound or Eliot? There's somebody that's got to go through and make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and we know the dates. But he says, that's not literature, that's bookkeeping. And there's a and so part of what happens in, for shorthand, we'll just say in academia, is that certain kinds of, I want to be careful because I like these people and I like what they do, because there's a scholarly part of me who loves making footnotes and making sure that my citations are correct and that I'm not just making stuff up that someone can check. Science works that way too. You got to be careful with your scholarship. But if that takes over, for whatever reason, if that takes over, then who gives a shit? I mean, and there are books written about Blake or whoever. I'm thinking about Blake a lot recently, that are like that. And nobody really cares. Blake was, nobody cares about that. But some people do, because some people like that kind of thing, and that's legit. But the real the real heart of what makes Jeff crazy is bigger than that. And it goes something like this. Um, and if I were being scholarly, I'd have to defend this with a 700-page book. But briefly speaking, the Enlightenment happened. And this I think gets to the heart of what I want to talk about with you for the rest of my life. So, I mean, there's really truth to the standard story of Western Enlightenment rationalism, which was, whenever you want to put the date, I don't know, 1500, 1600, 1700, somewhere in there in Western Europe, people just started thinking, yeah, we've had all these fucking religious wars, and the Protestants and the Catholics are killing each other, and God knows everybody hates the Muslims and the Jews, and it's just a mess. Couldn't we figure out what the hell is true rather than just beating each other over God knows what? And they thought, well, yeah, but you'd have to get rid of foolishness and stupidity. And we could do that by thinking clearly and rationally. And once you had a clear, rational thought, then you could show it to everyone. And everyone, and this is sort of the beginnings of the idea of democracy, that every human creature, except women, would be able to see the rationality of your thought, and they would all be compelled to agree rather than making up myths and stories and wishful thinking and all that stuff. Sadly, over the last couple of 300 years, it hasn't quite worked out the way they thought it would.
Yeah, weird, huh?
But yeah, but but I gotta say, and I've been thinking a lot about this, it's not a bad idea. You know, it's like, oh, wow, wouldn't that be cool if we could all sit down, all these warring peoples, all these stupid ass, I mean, pick your favorite stupid people, because we all have our favorite stupid people. What if we could all sit in a big room and we could agree on the basis of a shared language of reason? That was what they were trying to do. And for God knows a million reasons, it hasn't worked out very well. And one of the real downsides is the destruction of the planet. The short version is it kind of works. You can kind of figure stuff out. You can do physics, you can do engineering, you can make big guns, you can make really big bombs because you can really figure out a bunch of stuff about how the world works. The thing you can't figure out so easily is how people work. And there we are, and we still hate each other, and we're still really stupid and selfish. And because we're so powerful individually and collectively, now we're really dangerous. And so it becomes even more necessary to at least try to figure out how all these different visions of reality might come to some sort of happy communal way of living, which is where your appeal to the nature cultures it really is striking to me because I come from a long background of environmentalisms in the sciences. So you see that for me, that's all part of a single story. What makes Jeffrey crazy is that one of the one of the outcomes of that kind of academic enlightenment rationalism is we we know we know there's no such things as pick your favorite, paranormal phenomena, visitors from outer space, or if we let them in, we're just going to let in the metal, you know. And so let's answer your question directly. You're Jeff Kripal, and you're a student of comparative religion, and you're really bright, and you had your own pretty weird experience, and you have your own proclivities, and you study these things, and you just think, wow, religions are really weird. Oh my God, if you look at any religion, it's full of these crazy, impossible claims that whole crowds of people believe. And then you're told by your dissertation advisor, well, yes, of course, they thought that because they were ignorant. We don't take any of that seriously. We just look at things in their historical context. So now we can explain why they thought that people fly when, of course, people don't fly. And, it's all part of that same thing. And so Jeff is in this weird position of, and it's tough for him, it's amazing for him that he's at Rice and that he's made a name for himself, and that he's making it possible for crazy people to make their crazy claims. And he is in this pretty delicate position of trying to think impossibly within a cultural context in which that can be really dangerous, and trying to show how you could do that.
All right, folks, I am calling it there. We will pick up the conversation where I will be grilling him about the science of the flea penis. Well, I don't know that I'll be doing that, but we'll be talking about sciencey stuff in the way that you're probably used to me bagging on scientists in how we're doing radio. And I find it interesting that anytime I do bag on a sort of materialistic, scientific kind of rational exclusivity thinking, it's always fans of science that come down on me, listeners who are like, how dare you? Science isn't a religion. And then when I talk to actual scientists, they're like, yeah, I pretty much see what you're saying. That's basically true. So there's something for you to look at in the mirror by yourselves later, or not. Just tune in next week. All right? The conversation goes on. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I've got links to all of Tom's, his Substack and his website in the description. But let's not forget that Our Undoing Radio is the product of OurUndoing.com. So definitely visit Tom, and when you're done there, visit me and enjoy much more content like this. Essays, video, audio, all sorts of stuff at OurUndoing.com. But that's after you go visit Tom. Go visit Tom's Substack. Go visit Tom's website. All right. Come back and visit us next week. Take care.